Going back in time, Eckley Miners Village certainly is one of many so-called company towns, or patch towns as we like to refer to them, and they existed in various areas throughout the state. And the founding of the town, of course, came about when the coal mine operators decided they were going to work the underground deposits. Underground mining requires a very large labor force. And so the development of the coal mines here had a lot to do with the ethnic makeup of the people who came from Europe in order to work in coal mines. Now, when we talk about Eckley, we talk about the first groups who came to live here, and they came from Germany, from Scotland, from England, from Wales, and it was what I would term a polyglot assortment of people, and you would have walked up and down the streets here and probably heard a half a dozen different languages being spoken. Of course, those days are long past, but I'm old enough that I remember when that was still the culture that we experienced growing up in Freeland, where our neighbors next door spoke Slovak, and you had to know a few words in almost every language if you were going to work in a grocery store or a meat market. You wouldn't be doing business if you didn't know a little bit of Polish or a little bit of Italian.
Eckley is a company town. It was founded in the 1850s specifically to mine anthracite coal underneath, the place where we are now. It represents the immigrant experience, the pool of people from Europe and other parts of the world to come here to create that labor pool that was necessary to mine coal. But it's also a community. It sort of represents a defined space. It represents a social setting with churches and schools and social activities. So it's really a community that was part of this industrial process and immigration process of the United States. And that community still exists today. It's a different form, but with volunteers and visitors and people who live close by, there's still a strong sense of this as a place. And we do have tenants that live here as well, so we've been continuing the historic tradition of renting houses to people as a place to live. So we've been doing that every year since 1854.
My mother was born and raised here, born in 1914. In fact, the home where she was born still features the foundation, not very far from here, in fact. So she moved from Eckley because her father died. And in those days, you couldn't rent in Eckley unless you had a miner living in the home. And her father had no sons. Her mother did not want to go back to having boarders in the home, so they all moved to an adjacent town called Freeland. And my mother, during the Depression, she went to New Jersey to do housework, just like many of the young ladies in this area did. And she met my father there. They got married, and eventually my father died. And it was in 1975 when the state was looking into possibly starting this as part of their museum commission. They said that they would like to have people who used to live in Eckley come back to live. So my mother took them up on that, and in 1976, officially May 1st, 1976, we moved back here. And my mother passed away in 1993, and I've lived here ever since.
Well, I have a friend or a lady that lives down the road from me, and she grew up here. And she said it was a wonderful place to live. She said everybody helped everybody. Everybody knew everybody. And she said if you ever needed anything, everyone was there to help you. She said it was a great place to live. Although, living conditions weren't that good, but she said it was a great place to live.
My connection to the miner village is my grandparents, and not only my grandparents, but my family itself. I have lineage here. I had not only my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, my aunts, great aunts, and great uncles lived in the village too.
We basically grew up hearing about Eckley and his wife Sophia Coxe. I think Eckley died about 1895. Sophia, I believe, died in March 1926. Sophia was known as the angel of the anthracite coal field. She was pretty well off, so her later years she spent a lot of her money helping out miners' families in needs and medical, families that needed medical help because there really wasn't a lot of good hospitals or doctors around. So a lot of her money was put into helping out people, and I gather she would even some days go around with the doctor or a nurse and helping out people in the various towns that the family owned or managed or leased out. She seems to be, a very good character. Eckley, who died, he was very much into the charity and helping out the people, even though technically Eckley would have been considered an anthracite coal baron. They did put money back into the community by helping out at Lehigh University and I believe some hospitals in the area.
The importance is multifold, I would say. First off, it's a place where people can remember their heritage. Because this was once was hundreds of places like it, and it's the last one. It's the last place where people can kind of come and see how their ancestors might have lived. I mean, ancestors may be too strong a word, but their relatives, their a few generations back. So this is how they came. This is what they experienced. So this is part of people's family history. And also it's a community space as well. So people from the region can come up here for festivals and events and programs, learn about history, listen to some music, or participate in other activities. So it provides heritage, and then it provides community space as well.
Paramount actually owned the village for 2 years while they were filming here. They actually bought the village, okay? And they put the actual, the lines, the power lines, the phone lines, they put it underneath. So that way in itself, Paramount enhanced the village. And they enhanced the village because now you don't see all that, and I think that that's a positive attribute.
Well, the movie really transformed people's thinking of the village. So Eckley was one of probably hundreds of similar patch towns in northeast Pennsylvania. But as the industry started winding down in the mid-20th century, a lot of the patch towns were subdivided. They were all owned as a single entity by a mining company, but they were subdivided. The houses were sold off. The excess property was sold off when it wasn't beneficial to the business to own them anymore. Eckley was different. In the late 60s, Eckley was still a company town, was still owned by one person, and the people that lived here paid rent to that person. So it was easy when Paramount was looking for locations to shoot them on the McGuires to select Eckley because it meant one contract, one negotiation and one contract. Even though Eckley had been here since the 1850s, by the 1960s the site had evolved as any house would over a period of time as technology changes. So while these were originally just simple wood buildings, over time they were expanded. Electricity was brought in, plumbing was brought in, paving was brought in. So the village had sort of evolved from, sort of humble roots to be more contemporary in the 1960s. So there was new siding, porches, and things. So when Paramount came in, they needed to sort of erase those modern surfaces that everybody saw. So they buried the power lines, they buried the phone lines, they covered all the houses with, or recovered the houses with siding, because most of that had been gone by the 1960s. So in effect, they transformed a modern little village into a historic setting. And after the filming was done, there were some people in the town of Hazleton, the city of Hazleton nearby, who realized that this was an important sort of recreation of what this region, what was once very common in this region. So they got together, raised some money, and purchased the social portion of the village, the houses, the churches, and so forth, from the landowner, from the mine owner, and then donated them to the state for the creation of Eckley. And that's how we started.
Talk about Eckley being a village frozen in time. And I think it's easier to get that sense when it looks as it would have. I mean, we have a lot more trees and things than we did back then. It wouldn't have had a nice gravel road like it does now, but I definitely think not having fire hydrants and modern conveniences and things visible makes it a lot more appealing, yes.
Because this actually stands out as a mid-19th century village, and it is not a town. It is, like you said, it is a village. It does stand out because not only is it being preserved as best as it could, but Paramount Pictures came here and they made the movie, the Molly Maguire film. And that in itself, Paramount wanted to come here and they wanted to do a film about the mining community, and I believe it was how people were being oppressed. Although the movie was dark, you still got what you needed to get out of it.
If it hadn't been for Paramount using the site as a movie set, I doubt seriously that Eckley would ever become a state historical site.
Has to be here because we have to have people know about our beginnings and what happened here and how the people were treated and how they lived. That people have to remember that, and we have to keep this here. We have to.
And if someone were to come into the museum and focus on the day-to-day life, because there are 7 particular scenes here in the museum, on 7 particular days. Day 1 they did this, day 2 they did that, day 3 and so on. Okay, and my grandparents actually did that. And Sunday was a day of rest for them. They would go with their friends, they would go pick berries, they would go just, relax and have fun.
Well, this village represents a lot more than just what's here. So this is a company town, it is a mining town, and there are special social conditions that exist in places like this. And this was replicated, this type of environment was replicated all over the country, especially during the great growth periods of the American industry and American economy. So it's important because, Eckley is, as far as I know, the only historic company town like it left and interpreted in the country. So it's important to remember not only the way people lived when they came to Northeast Pennsylvania to mine, but it's also a similar story that was played out across the country. As people immigrated here from Europe, came to Ellis Island or through another port, and then wound up in these these remote locations working for a company.
I think if you want to get a feeling for, U.S. history, particularly here in the anthracite coal region of northeastern PA, which is the largest deposit of anthracite coal, I believe, in North America, I think it's a good place to come to get an idea or a feeling of what life was like at the different levels and for different people here in the early days of the Industrial Revolution.
If you don't know what Eckley Miners Village represents, then you're really not understanding what what was happening in America in the 1800s and 1900s, both rurally and urbanly, because even though this was a rural area and people were isolated basically and did not move around, the product that they mined did go to the big cities and did generate heat for people's living, and also generated energy to drive the Industrial Revolution. So what the United States is now, good and bad, is due a lot in part to what happened in the coal fields.
I can remember one day 4 people came in to take a tour, 2 men and 2 ladies. And they said that the one couple was from Hazleton, and they never had been here before, and the other couple was visiting from California. So they thought they would come and see Eckley and bring the couple along with them. So I took them on the tour, and by the time we were finished, down by the Episcopal Church, the one man came up to me and he said, "I didn't want to come here." He says, "I lived about the mines all my life." And he says, "I know all about that. But my wife insisted we bring our friends up here." So he says, "I want to tell you, I enjoyed it immensely." He said, "It was such a wonderful experience. Thank you so much for taking us on the tour." That was a great experience. It really was.
And so I think that Eckley is a very unique place. And in not only as a historical place, not only as a representation of this social setting that existed and was replicated throughout the country, but because of this continued community that has existed for 160 some years. It's a very special place, and I think if you look at things like social media, where people have a place to voice their opinion or their feelings, every time something comes up on Eckley, you're just overwhelmed with the number of responses. So I think it's a very special place because of its connection to the people that are still here. And I've been in museums for 25 years. Worked at industrial sites for almost as long, and there isn't a place like Eckley where this sense of community just pervades almost everything else that we do here. So it's a unique place. It's a very important place, I think, for local history and for American history as well.
I love Eckley. That's all I can say. I love it. I love everything about it. And I've been here for 37 years, so I guess I do love it.